Good morning. Good to see you all this morning. And as the pastor said, we are International Mission Board, Southern Baptist Convention missionaries. We serve in Panama. Normally we don't use the word missionary with ourselves. We try to kind of avoid that word, and in the churches that we work with, and later as I explain what we do, I think maybe you'll start to understand why we do that. But many countries, the countries that most need the gospel, are very resistant to that word. That's a bad word for them. So we try to help people as they're moving to those places to avoid using that word, because that's a word that can really scare the people that they're going to speak to. So we use the word worker more than missionary, but we are missionaries. So if we could have our family picture up here, our two daughters stayed behind this morning, and they'll go to the church there where we're staying in McDonough, and spend the afternoon with their cousins. Nancy's sister and her family live just down the road, and so they'll be there. All right, there we go. This side is Gina. She's a freshman at Liberty University. There I am, my wife Nancy from Honduras, the pastor said. And this is Daniela. She's in 11th grade at Eagles Landing Christian Academy in McDonough. And she loves that last song you played, by the way. She plays that all the time. So that was great. She would have loved that. As I said, we are supported through Lighting Christmas offering. We want to thank you for the many years of faithfulness in giving to that, and thank you for continuing to give that to that. Now, for the rest of the sermon, I'm not going to mention money. All right, we're going to talk about other things. And you might expect me to talk about the Great Commission, but I'm going to talk about all of Matthew except the Great Commission. See, I've got this concern, Pastor. I'm afraid that people, when they read Matthew, and when they read Matthew 28, 19, and 20, they think, oh yes, this whole missions thing is tacked on to the end. As if Jesus said, well, see, don't forget, go to all the nations, the whole thing, baptizing, making disciples, and you know what I mean. But that's not at all the way it is. So I want us to take a look this morning at God's Word. We're going to kind of run through the book of Matthew real quickly and look at some things. But I can have the map up here now. Here we go. So here's a map of Israel. But before we get to God's Word, let me give you some background. You remember, pull out my thing again. You remember when in the Old Testament that the Israelites invaded? I'll do just one side, sorry, but they came in down here at, they crossed right about here into Israel. They conquered this mountain area, then they went up and they conquered this mountain area, and for a long time this was all they controlled. And then David and then his son Solomon both extended the kingdom, and they went up further up into here. Basically, Israel ended up in this area, and it came down. It was a little bit weak on this side. Remember in the Old Testament that they couldn't actually get rid of some of the people who had lived there before. They resisted them, and they made pacts with them, and different things happened. So they actually had people living there that weren't Jews. For example, this whole plain here by the Mediterranean was the Philistines. They lived there, and they were never really able to get rid of them. And then up in the north here were the Phoenicians and the Edomites and Moabites and different people over in this area. And so even in the Old Testament, Israel was never a purely Jewish nation. There were always foreigners. And Nancy and I come today, the pastor had to give it away and tell you I was from Michigan. I was going to do my best Southern accent, and I was going to try to make you think I was from around here. And Nancy was going to do a y'all every once in a while, try to make you think she was from around here. But as you can tell, we ain't from around here. All right? In Israel, there were always people who weren't from around there. And as time went on, it even got worse. About 720 years before Jesus, there was an invasion from the north, and they came down and they took away a lot of the people who were here, and they brought their own people, moved them into this area, and settled them in there. If you remember in John 4, the Samaritan woman, Samaritans were a mixture of the Jews with these other people. And that's why the good Jews, the religious Jews, looked down on the Samaritans, because they weren't good blood. They weren't from around here. They had other Gentile blood mixed in with their blood. So then in about 520 years before Jesus, there was an invasion from the Babylonians, and they came into the southern kingdom here, took a bunch of people away, and brought a few people in, and that mixed things up even more. And then Alexander the Great, you remember, you've seen the movie, right? Alexander the Great came down from Greece. He conquered he died, they divided it up and everything. Greeks now in here, all right? And then about 60 years before Jesus, the Romans came in. And they brought a bunch of people. And now, if we had the whole map here, you can see how this is a great trade route between the north and the south. And even east and west, people tended to go through here. There were roads that headed through here. So there was a lot of commerce in Israel, international commerce. There were a lot of people there who were not Jews. See, when we read the New Testament, when we read Matthew, often we see Jesus living and moving in a purely Jewish world. It wasn't really like that. There were Gentiles all over the place. A good Jew kept away from him. You know, he walked down the street like this, and he avoided, if he could, at all costs, any non-Jew, because he would have to ritually purify himself if he came in contact with them. But they were all over the place. The Greeks especially had brought in a lot of people. There were a lot of stuff. They had a stadium there where they had sporting events in Jerusalem, just outside Jerusalem, outside the walls, of course. But and the Greeks, if you remember, the Greeks liked to exercise and play games nude. All right, that whole thing was an abomination to the Jews. All right, so you don't see that in the New Testament. All that stuff was there. So we have to remember that Jesus didn't live in what we would maybe in our minds call a lily white atmosphere where everybody looked just like him and everybody talked. It wasn't like that at all. And there's a reason. In Galatians 4:4, it says, "And in the fullness of time, God brought forth His Son." So I think that God had a reason for bringing all those people together in that place. Now, if we had stopped somebody on the street in Jerusalem at the time of Jesus, and we'd said, "Hey, any foreigners around here?" Foreigners everywhere. Everywhere you look, you keep bumping into them. I can't go anywhere without seeing foreigners here. You know, and he probably would have complained about foreigners and immigration problem and all those kinds of things because he didn't like what he saw. What I see is God is doing something. God is bringing together the nations. And so at the appropriate time, Jesus comes into the world and he does something interesting with his disciples. He doesn't tack on to the end of the book of Matthew, and all four Gospels have a Great Commission. He didn't tack that on to the end of the book. He started with it. All right, let's go ahead and take our Bibles. Let me see if this one has oh, Pastor, you gave me a Bible without letter edition. What am I going to do now? All right, you know the book of Matthew, right? Chapters 5, 6, 7 are the Sermon on the Mount, right? All teaching and everything. Then starting in chapter 8, we start seeing some real action. All right, the first chapters were the birth and the baptism and the temptation and all that. Then the Sermon on the Mount, and we start in chapter 8. Okay, and one of the first things we see is starting in verse 5, a centurion. Help me here. What's a centurion? A Roman guard, a Roman soldier. He's in charge of I looked it up. I thought he was in charge of 100 soldiers. You know, he's not. For some reason, the Romans couldn't count. A centurion was not in charge of 100 soldiers. Apparently, it was only 80. I've not figured that one out yet, but apparently it wasn't 100. Anyway, so one of the first people he heals here is a Roman. Now, we can put up with Italians. I like Italian food and everything, but this is a whole different thing. The Romans had conquered them. The Romans were, they were there. They were not good guys. They forced them to do things they did not want to do. They were the invading army. So to heal a Roman, just something about that should have automatically, I'm sure the disciples thought, what's this guy doing? But, okay, all right, go ahead. Now let's take a look. First of all, let me go to my thing. Okay, let's do a couple of clicks here. First click. Okay, before we get to the first click, go ahead and leave it. But let me remember. Where did the wise men come from? Again, we don't know how many, but where did they come from? The east. All right. Let me see if my thing working here. Either it's not working out. Here we go. They came from the east, all right, a bunch of foreigners came to see Jesus down here in Bethlehem, all right? All right. Then they went over to Egypt. Joseph has a dream, takes them to Egypt. So Jesus is already traveling. Out of Egypt have I called my son, the Old Testament said. So then they bring him back up, and because he has another dream, they take him up to Nazareth. They say, stay away from the Jerusalem area. So they go up to Nazareth, and that's where they settle. But anybody remember in the New Testament they call it Galilee of the Gentiles? I wonder why they would have called it Galilee of the Gentiles. Because it was a mess up there. They were all over the place. Galilee was full of Gentiles. Interesting. That's where Jesus settled. That's where he grew up, in that kind of an atmosphere. All right, the next one then has him coming down here to be baptized here at the Jordan River. All right, the next one, he crosses over, he goes into the wilderness in this area. I picked this area as a wilderness, so don't even know exactly for sure where, but this is, he goes into the wilderness. Then he goes back up. Go ahead and take it. All right. He goes up and he sets up base in Capernaum, right on the edge of the Sea of Galilee. And that's basically his base. And that's where we're gonna pause for a second, just a minute, and take a look here in chapter 8. Again, chapters 5, 6, 7, Sermon on the Mount. Chapter 8 is the beginning of the ministry for Matthew's coming. Now Matthew doesn't join this merry band of disciples until chapter 9, so he's hearing about this from others. All right, but he's going to tell us a story here, and it's a whole great sermon. I love the sermon. I don't have time to preach it, so I'm just going to touch a part of it. Let's read starting in verse 28. All right. When Jesus had come to the other side, to the region of the Gadarenes, the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Let me see if I can point it out. It's down here. It's down here on this corner, even up here. So he crosses over. I think if you press one more time, we'll see an arrow. Oops, wrong. Okay, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Leave that one up. So Jesus crossed over to the region of the Gadarenes. 2 demon-possessed men met him as they came out of the tombs. Who lives in tombs? Besides dead people, usually nobody, right? And dead people aren't living in tombs, actually. So, funny, the Jews had a rule about not coming in contact with dead bodies. You just couldn't do it. You know, if you did, you had to go through the whole purification thing. Living among dead bodies, not good at all. All right? They were so violent that no one could pass that way. Suddenly they shouted, "What do you have to do with us, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" Now, a long way off from them, a large herd of pigs was feeding. Another pause here. How often do Jews eat pork? Oh, they don't. So, why would there be 2,000 pigs if this was a Jewish community? Obviously, it's not Jewish. All right, there's part of the thing. Jesus has taken his disciples at the beginning of his ministry on a short-term, cross-cultural missions experience. He's opening their eyes to a lot of things. Now, in a little bit, he's going to send them out throughout Galilee. But here, he's taking them, even before that, he's taking them on a cross-cultural mission trip. Right? Their eyes must have been huge. First of all, these demon-possessed guys. How often did they come across demon-possessed people? Probably not very often. These 2 guys come out of there. When we read Mark and Luke's stories, the men cut themselves. They were so strong that they would break the chains that they were bound in. They swore. They were naked. They didn't wear clothes. All of these were against the rules, by the way. These are against Jewish rules. We don't permit them. And Jesus is taking his disciples, Pastor. He's taking his disciples out to see this kind of activity. Goodness gracious me, we wouldn't want to do that. We want to keep our people protected from all those kinds of things. Jesus did. He took them on a tour and put them in a situation. First of all, do you remember what happened on the lake on the way over? Big storm. They all thought they were going to die. He has to stand up, calm the storm. Cross-cultural trips can be dangerous. Leaving our comfort zone can be dangerous. Bad things sometimes happen. And almost something happened on that occasion. But Jesus took them across the Sea of Galilee, through that storm, and they came to this place. They saw these, if I can use the term, crazy guys. I mean, they were acting crazy. They were demon-possessed. All sorts of weird stuff going on. And if that's not enough, Jesus gives the demons permission to leave the 2 men and to go into the herd of pigs. And what do the herd of pigs do? They run off the cliff, into the water, and drown. All right? So then what are all these people that are taking care of the pigs? Their job, they just saw their job go out the window and everything, so, panic. All of a sudden, they run back to the town and they report. Now, there were several towns in that area. In fact, that whole area is called Decapolis, meaning 10 cities. So I'm going to guess that they went to the nearest one. And after that whole experience, I'm going to guess they didn't, just kind of casually take a Saturday afternoon walk. They probably ran. And when they got there, they were probably talking practically gibberish. And the pigs in the water and trying to swim, and they couldn't, they drowned, and the whole thing, and they were probably driving. And everybody said, "What is this?" And so everybody runs out. The reason I focus on the hurry is because Jesus probably only had about 2 hours, Pastor, maximum. maximum. I'm guessing, I'm stretching it as far as I can, and I'm saying he only had probably about 2 hours to disciple this man. And when they came back, and I'm imagining them rushing back, hurrying back to get back, they find the man seated and clothed and in his right mind. Now there's a perfect example of the transformation that occurs in the life of a person who accepts Christ. All of that stuff from the past is past. Now, the man is seated, he's calm, he's dressed appropriately behaved, and learning from Jesus in his right mind. Now you might say, wait a minute, the math doesn't work. There were 2, and now there's 1. All right? Mark and Luke only talk about 1. Matthew mentions 2. I think what happened, just like with the 10 lepers, remember there were 10 lepers and only 1 came back? And Jesus said, what about the others? I think there were 2 men here. Both were undemonized, if we can use that word. I'll invent that word. They were undemonized, and one of them took off and went home, and the other stayed with Jesus and was discipled, sitting at his feet, learning from him. And so all these people come back, and they're scared. You know, the pigs are out there floating. Imagine 2,000 pigs floating in the Sea of Galilee, and how much was that worth? That was my whole investment out the window or in the water, whatever. And all of this, you know, and they got scared. They said to Jesus, leave. Just go, please. Leave us alone. So Jesus and his disciples go back and climb into the boat. And this man who's been transformed, like any person who's been transformed by Jesus, wants to be with Jesus. And says, we don't see that in this story, it's in Mark and Luke, says, let me go with you. And Jesus says, no. Instead, go back to your own people and tell them what great things God has done for you. Now this amazes me for a couple of reasons. One is, he didn't have seminary pastor. How in the world was God going to send him to tell people about Jesus if he didn't go to seminary? And he had maybe 2 hours of discipleship. Folks, I don't think we have to be seminary graduates to tell people about Jesus. Can you imagine? Picture with me this guy goes into the town, into one of these towns, and he strikes up a conversation with the guy and says, hey, you know about those 2 guys living up in the tombs? Yeah, we can hear them from here at night. You know, their screams and their yells and their swearing and stuff. It reaches all the way to our town. I'm one of those guys. The guy looks at him and says, you're not one of those guys. Those guys run around naked. I'm one of those 2 guys. A man named Jesus came, took the demons out of me, made me a new person, and taught me about himself, and said that I am forgiven of my sins. A man named Jesus. So even though this guy didn't have seminary training, even though he hadn't gone through he was just telling them what had happened in his own life. And that's really what we're expected to do, is tell people what's happened in our lives, what God has done in our lives. And so if I were to end the sermon today, right now, at this point, I'd say go back to your own people and tell them what great things God has done in you. Because that's what I think Jesus was having them do here. All right? So what we've got here is Jesus has taken his disciples on a dangerous cross-cultural journey, and they have experienced something bizarre. All right? And they have seen all this stuff. So they get back in the boat, they go back across the lake, and then we see the arrow going up to 7, if you can see it there. Because in chapter 9, Jesus takes them on a trip through Galilee, and then in chapter 10, he sends them out by themselves, 2 by 2. You know, it's interesting that he says in chapter 10, don't go to anybody except the lost sheep of the tribe of Israel. Well, if we read that, you know, thinking, okay, that's Jesus, you know, he only wants to save Jews. You know, he just wants the Jews to be saved. No. That wouldn't make any sense unless there were a lot of Gentiles around. And he's telling them, even though I have shown you how to minister to Gentiles, even though I have shown you that I love all people, already I've healed a Roman soldier, a Roman centurion's a Roman centurion's worker. Even though I have I've healed these 2 guys filled with demons, even though I've done that in a foreign land, I want you to focus just on Jews this time. Because later when he sends them out again, in John we see the second sending out, he changes the expression there. He doesn't tell them you need to take don't take anything. lets them take things with them. And he doesn't say, don't go to the Gentiles, precisely because he wants them to go to the Gentiles. So here in Matthew, what we're seeing is Jesus is doing a lot of things. We need to move along here. All right, next arrow. So he's going back and forth. All right, so that was the arrow I had. All right, go back up. Next one. Next arrow. There we go. See that arrow up there? This is another interesting arrow. Jesus takes his disciples all the way up to a place called Tyre and Sidon. There are two cities right up here that were never part of Israel. And Jesus goes up there, and he meets a woman. It's kind of interesting because the woman says to him, she comes and she says, please help me, my daughter is sick and she needs to be healed. And Jesus kind of ignores her. And the disciples say, make her go away and everything. And Jesus says kind of in a general term, I only came, to save the lost sheep of Israel. And why should we give crumbs to the little dogs? Now, I know that today one of the cool things, I know I'm cool to you, Pastor, because I'm hipster, I don't call people dogs. Today it's common to say, hey, dog, how you doing and stuff. I wouldn't do that. In fact, I get offended when somebody calls me dog, And at that time, that was a great offense, to call somebody a dog. And Jesus basically said, you little dog, to this woman. And the woman says, yes, but even the little dogs get the little crumbs that fall from the little children's tables. There's a little play on words there that she does. And Jesus says, wow, what great faith. I haven't seen this kind of faith in all Israel. Let it be done unto you as you request. All right, so Jesus has said an interesting thing. I have come to only work among the lost sheep of Israel. But he has taken his disciples. Now, why would he do that? Take his disciples all the way up. Work for him. Take his disciples all the way up, way out of Israel. That's a long walk, folks. Crossing this little mountain range and all that, to go up to Tyre and Sidon. Taking them outside, he's trying to expand their thinking. All right, trying to help them to see that this isn't just about Jerusalem, about the holy city, about the holy Jews. This is about something much bigger. All right, next arrow. So then when he comes back from there, he takes a little detour, and look where he ends up. Same place he was a little while earlier. All right, this is chapter 15, if I remember correctly, in Matthew. And this time when he comes back, what happens? These are the same people who told him, go away. But while he was gone, this undemonized guy had been telling everybody his testimony. And what happens when Jesus comes back to that area? They bring lots of sick people to him. No longer are they sending him out. They're saying, hey, let's bring all the sick. They weren't any more Jewish at this moment than they were when they kicked him out. All right? So Jesus has gone back again to a mostly Gentile area, and he's having people bring their sick to him even there. So we see the difference that's made when a person goes back and tells his story of transformation. The attitudes of the people are changed. And I think that's a great part of the story. All right, next one. We've got another trip coming up here. This one's in chapter 16. This is one of the significant chapters in the book of Matthew, because this is where Jesus founds the church. All right, and if he had gotten a committee of Baptists together and he said, where should I, found my church? They would have all said, downtown Jerusalem. Right around the corner from the temple maybe, or if not in the temple. And yet, look what Jesus does. Jesus takes his disciples on a trip all the way outside of Israel, something that never belonged to Israel, to found his church. I think there's symbolism in that. Because this was not going to end up being a Jewish religion, Christianity. This was for the entire world. And I think Jesus took his disciples on this long trip and founded his church outside of Israel on purpose. All right, next one. Then he comes back down. He comes down to the wilderness area here. Go ahead. Next one crosses over to Jericho, and then he goes to Jerusalem, and then back up to Galilee where he meets after the crucifixion, he meets the disciples. All right. Let me take a pause. I've been doing the whole history. We've been doing geography. We've been looking at the book of Matthew. Let me take a breath here. Let me pause and tell you why I think this is important. Jesus had a heart for reaching all the world. And he wasn't going to do it the way that the Jews would have written the whole story up. And And he wasn't going to do it the way we would have written the story up. He wanted to do it his way. His way sometimes, his way are not our ways, hardly ever. All right? The way we think the things should be done are not the ways that God works. Let me give you an example. If we were to have a committee, I love committees, I don't, but I'll say I do. If we were to have a Baptist committee get together today and say, how are we going to win the world? We'd come up with something like, we need to get our Pastor Daniel and his family out on the mission field, and we need to prepare him, and he needs to learn the language Arabic. Let's teach him Arabic. And he needs to go and he needs to study and some more in seminary. No, you've got a dean in already, so you're topped out there. You don't need to go any further. He doesn't need any more seminary, but he needs some more training, and he needs this, and he needs that. And then we're going to send him over there, and he can. That's what the Baptist committee will do. Do you know what God's doing something else? God's doing something really interesting. He's using people like this undemonized guy who had 2 hours of discipleship to tell people about Jesus, to prepare people for Jesus. He's also using people like the Samaritan woman. You remember the story of the Samaritan woman? Really bad reputation. We won't go into that. And when she finally encounters Jesus and she goes back to town, the Bible says that many believed because of her word. And Jesus ended up spending a couple more days there. Big evangelistic crusade going on here. Because of the word of this woman. Two of the biggest evangelists in all the New Testament are this undemonized guy, probably not a Jew, and the Samaritan woman, only half a Jew. And they're the greatest evangelists in the New Testament, besides the Apostle Paul. Who, by the way, where did he grow up? In the middle of Gentile land. We won't go there. That's another sermon. I'm free in April, Pastor, if you want to come back for April. But anyway, so here's the point I'm trying to make. Like the Baptist committee would say, let's send more preacher boys like Daniel. God's saying, I want to send people that have been transformed, not professional preacher people, just people who tell their story. Here's what Nancy and I do. We live in Panama, which, as you remember, is the isthmus that connects North and South America. And we recruit people from all of the Americas and the Caribbean to take the gospel to the rest of the world. But I don't go in and preach a sermon and say, who will go and how many of you have been to seminary would like to. I don't do that. What I actually do, if I can walk around, right? Got my sound going here. Actually, as I meet people, I say, hey, what do you do for a living? Electrician. Wow, interesting. Have you ever thought about doing what you do now in a more strategic place? Go ahead and say it. Yeah, that's what they always say. So, okay. But that's how I get started. All right? I don't remember seeing a case, Pastor, in the New Testament, even in the Old Testament, where God said, if you want to be one of my servants, come down to the front. We'll lay hands on you and say, He always selects the man or woman that He wants to serve. Again, we have a tendency to want to do one way. God works another way. Here's what God is doing in the world. I wish I had a world map up there that I could show this. You all know this is true. People are moving around the globe like never before. Now, I'll be honest with you. When I looked on the map at First Baptist Moreland, I did not expect to see any Latinos here. All right. Certainly never thought about Cubanos. I mean, that if I could have gotten off the list, I would say Cubanos. But I really expected this to be a very homogeneous. Two families represented. One family sitting on this side, one family sitting on, and they've both been here from the beginning. Voting members out in the cemetery and still voting. That's what I expected. But look what I see here. I see an example of what God's doing in the world. He's moving people like never before. Not just migration, business, refugees. All sorts of things are happening around the world. God is moving people like never before. And I've run across some statistics that just blow my mind. For example, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is one of those places where absolutely zero missionaries are permitted for any reason, not even to visit. I couldn't even go there on a visit. they invite people in to work there. And I was amazed recently to find out that there are over 700,000 Filipinos living and working in Saudi Arabia. 700,000. Now, many of those are household workers, maids, servants, kind of thing. And of course, these Arabs look down on them. You know, they are inferior and they're house help, and you don't pay any attention to them. Folks, this is the way God works. If we were to plan the whole thing, our little committee would plan it, we'd want somebody important. We'd say, let's get John Maxwell to go in and do a leadership conference, and we'd be thinking top. God likes to come in from the bottom. And He's got all these people who have gone there looking for work, and they're working there, and they're sharing the gospel. And not all 700,000, obviously, but if 10% of the Philippines is Christian, then I'm going to extrapolate and say probably about 10% of that 700,000 are believers too. And many of them are going to be sharing the gospel. Do you remember a great story in 2 Kings chapter 5 about Naaman, the Syrian, who had leprosy and went down and had to dip himself 7 times in the river? First he didn't want to do it, and then who convinced him? His servant boys, his servants that were with him, convinced him to do that. But the great heroine of the story is the little Israelite girl who convinced him in the first place. She said to his wife, her owner, she'd been captured, by the way, in a raid. She was a slave, a young girl, outside of her country, being forced to work, and she says, you know what? My God can heal that leprosy. And if my owner would go to see the man of God, that man of God could heal him of his leprosy. What a great story. How did that man come to glorify God? If you read the end of the story, he glorifies God, the God of Israel. How did that happen? A little servant girl. That's how God works. We don't think that way. We want to send in preacher boys who are great preachers. God wants to send in a servant person. Somebody who will just tell their story. Maybe an electrician. Maybe this, maybe that, maybe the other. In our case, Nancy was a physician working in Eastern Tennessee. I was working with churches. I was that preacher boy kind of thing. But I also, when I first went, I went as a tent maker. Remember how Paul was a tent maker? He made tents for a living. And if you really study Acts closely, you'll see that he worked much more often than he didn't. All right, and he had reasons for that. But anyway, I was a tent maker. Went to Honduras, and that's how we met and married. So I respect these people who go into these places and do these kinds of things. And that's what we do. We recruit Latin Americans to take the gospel to the rest of the world. Pastor, how much time do we have? About 5 minutes? 10 minutes? Okay. And so we are looking for people who can go and live. Now, here's one of the cool things. Now, you could actually pass for Arabic. And when I said Arabic, it hit me. With that hairdo and that heavy stubble, you could pull it off until you start speaking Arabic, and they know. Nancy and I went to Egypt one time. We thought we were going to be serving in Egypt, and we went to Egypt, and a funny thing happened. Nobody spoke to me in Arabic. Now, I can't figure that out, and I don't know why that would have happened. But they spoke to Nancy in Arabic. They thought she was Egyptian. Maybe she walked like an Egyptian. I don't know. But they would speak to her in Arabic, and the little light came on. I'm a little bit slow sometimes, but the little light came on, and I said, you know what? Latin Americans do look a lot like these folks. There are a lot of cultural similarities. We're very different. Especially rural Americans, we're very different from the rest of the world. Not just in our looks, but in the way we think, the way we act, the way we talk, the way we live, all about it. And so as soon as they see us, there's this uh-oh kind of mentality. And yet a Latin American can go in and fit in easily. All right? So that's part of what we do. We recruit people. We try to help people to get to other places because God is doing some exciting things. And He's doing it in business. He's doing it in education. Yesterday I ran across something, Friday I ran across something, and I'll just throw this out in case there are any teachers out here. A job request for teachers in a country that is predominantly close to the gospel. And they fly you there. It's a 2-year commitment. Fly you there and back home. And they pay $2,000, $2,500 a month. and plus a place to live. That's pretty impressive. You know, somebody can go and work. They don't have to raise funds, because our Baptist committee would say, before the pastor goes out, we have to, if he doesn't join the IMB, we have to send him out and have him raise funds and do all this kind of stuff. It takes a year, maybe 2 years to get enough funds raised, and then you go out, and then as soon as you get out, people forget about you, so that goes down. You've got to come back, and you've got to raise funds again. You've got to keep people pumped up so that they're giving to you. There's a person who goes to share the gospel, and all the way it's paid. It's pretty interesting. That we don't have to raise funds. In fact, there's so many stories running around my head right now, but I can't tell them. So let me just stop right there and say, God is opening doors for people. Let me tell one story, then I'll go. We know a family in Panama that gave this testimony. They had gone to India. They went to a particular city in India where the previous missionaries had been burned alive, and it had been several years, and so they were sent in. And one day he goes to the store, and a man that he looked at and thought looked like about 85 years old, in his 80s, asked him, "Are you a Christian?" And right away, how do I answer? You know, he was afraid. So he acted like he didn't understand him. The man repeated it. Finally, he said, "Yes." He said the man grabbed him by both wrists. He said, "My knees started to tremble." Now, you know, I was sure that they were going to take him. But the man said to him, "All my life, I've wanted to meet a Christian." Folks, there are people out there who've never in their lives, and never will, meet a Christian, because the governments, their culture, close down the access to missionaries. And they try to keep away people who could bring in the story of Jesus. All these people know about Jesus is what their religious teachers tell them about Jesus. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess they don't tell the whole story. Right? Many people would like to meet a Christian. Missionaries can't get there. Maybe you can. People like you, people with your skills. Certainly people with your skills from Latin America as well. We're going to have an invitation here in a minute. Pastor, I don't know how you do an invitation, but I'd like for you to come stand in front. And